It was supposed to be the beginning of something great. My startup wasn't much, a small tech company working out of a cramped office downtown, fueled by caffeine and dreams. We were building software that could automate routine business tasks, saving companies hours of tedious work. Nothing revolutionary, but it had potential. I believed in it. What I believed in even more, though, were Matt and Kyle. They weren't just my co-founders, they were my best friends. We'd met in college, bonded over late-night coding sessions and grand plans to conquer the tech world. When I first pitched them the idea for the startup, they didn't hesitate. "We're in," they said, without a second thought. In those early days, it felt like we were unstoppable. We'd work 14-hour days, fueled by cheap takeout and endless optimism. Whenever things got tough, we leaned on each other. When our first client bailed halfway through a project, Matt gave a rousing speech that had us all laughing and ready to start over. When we couldn't afford new equipment, Kyle found a way to refurbish old machines until they ran like new. But running a business is like being in a pressure cooker. The stress, the long hours, the constant uncertainty, it changes people. Or maybe it just reveals who they really are. The cracks started small, barely noticeable at first. Matt began showing up late to meetings, brushing it off with a joke or an excuse about traffic. Kyle started missing deadlines, claiming he was burnt out. I chalked it up to growing pains. We were all under a lot of pressure, and I figured they'd bounce back once things settled down. Then came the money problems. Our biggest client, a mid-sized logistics company, abruptly ended their contract. They claimed they were downsizing, but I knew it was because we hadn't delivered on time. Kyle had promised them a feature that wasn't ready, and now we were paying the price. Losing that client hurt, badly. We had bills to pay, employees to support, and no safety net. I stayed up nights running the numbers, trying to figure out how to keep us afloat. "Don't worry, man," Matt said one evening as we sat in the office. The others had gone home, and it was just the two of us, surrounded by empty coffee cups and glowing monitors. "We'll figure it out. We always do." I wanted to believe him. But something in his tone felt off. The turning point came a month later. Matt and Kyle called me into a meeting, their expressions unusually serious. They didn't even wait for me to sit down before dropping the bomb. "We've been talking," Matt began, his eyes avoiding mine. "And we think it's time for a change." "A change?" I repeated, confused. Kyle leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "The company's not working, man. We're bleeding money, and it's because of, well, some of the decisions you've made." I stared at him, stunned. "What are you talking about? I've been the one keeping this place running while you two have been phoning it in." "Come on, that's not fair," Matt said, holding up his hands. "We've all been working hard. But the fact is, the investors are losing confidence, and we need to make some tough choices." "And what exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, my voice tight. Kyle hesitated, glancing at Matt. "We think you should step down." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I laughed, a bitter, disbelieving sound. "You can't be serious." "We are," Matt said quietly. "We've already talked to the investors. They're on board. If you sign over your shares, we can bring in someone else to take over as CEO and turn this thing around." I looked back and forth between them, searching for some sign that this was a joke. But their faces were stone-cold serious. "You're trying to push me out of my own company," I said slowly, the reality sinking in. "It's not like that," Matt insisted. "We're just doing what's best for the business." "What's best for the business?" I snapped, my voice rising. "This company wouldn't even exist without me. I'm the one who came up with the idea, who got the funding, who's been busting my ass to keep it alive while you two have been slacking off." Kyle stood up, his face red. "Don't act like you're some kind of martyr. We've been carrying you for months, and you know it." The argument spiraled from there, voices raised, accusations flying. By the time it was over, the ultimatum was clear: either I sell them my shares for a fraction of their value, or they walk away, taking our remaining clients and investors with them. I didn't have a choice. Without them, the company was dead in the water. The next day, I signed the papers. Walking out of that office for the last time felt like ripping out a piece of my soul. This was supposed to be my dream, my legacy. And now it was gone, stolen by the two people I thought I could trust more than anyone. But the betrayal didn't stop there. 6 months later, I was scrolling through the news on my laptop in the tiny apartment I'd rented after losing everything. There it was, in bold letters: local startup acquired for $12 million. It was my company. The same company Matt and Kyle had told me was failing, the one they'd practically forced me to give up. They'd sold it to a big corporation for a fortune. I stared at the screen, the blood draining from my face. They hadn't just taken my company. They'd taken the life I was supposed to have. And they were out there, living it up, while I was left with nothing. That night, lying awake on a lumpy mattress, I made a promise to myself. I would come back from this. And when I did, I would make sure Matt and Kyle regretted every single thing they'd done to me. Losing the company wasn't just a financial blow, it was a complete annihilation of my identity. For weeks, I barely got out of bed. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the betrayal over and over again. My anger grew darker with each passing day, but I had no outlet for it. My so-called best friends had moved on, and I was left behind, a ghost of my former self. But rock bottom has a strange way of waking you up. One morning, I looked at myself in the cracked mirror above the bathroom sink. The man staring back at me was someone I barely recognized, disheveled, unshaven, hollow-eyed. A failure. That's how Matt and Kyle wanted me to feel. Powerless. Defeated. Forgotten. "No more," I muttered under my breath. I wasn't going to let them win. They might have taken my company, but they hadn't taken my skills, my determination, or my ability to fight back. Slowly, I started to pull myself together. I shaved, cleaned up my apartment, and started applying for freelance gigs. The first few months were brutal. Companies wanted full-time employees, not some ex-CEO with a failed startup. I worked long hours for low pay, writing code for businesses that didn't care about my past. But I kept at it, because every project I completed brought me one step closer to rebuilding myself. Then I landed a gig with a small but rapidly growing tech firm. They were impressed with my experience and asked me to consult on a high-stakes automation project. It felt good to work on something meaningful again, but what really surprised me was how quickly my name started spreading through their network. "Hey, I heard you're working with Atlas Technologies," a recruiter messaged me on LinkedIn one day. "We've got a project that could use someone with your expertise." Soon, I was juggling multiple contracts, working 16-hour days, just like the old times. The money started to trickle in, then pour in. By the end of the first year, I'd paid off my debts and upgraded from my dingy apartment to a sleek studio downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine. More importantly, I was building a reputation. CEOs and investors were starting to take notice. I became the go-to guy for turning failing tech projects into success stories. And the more successful I became, the more I realized something: I didn't just want to rebuild my life. I wanted revenge. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One night, while scrolling through a local business forum, I stumbled across a post that caught my attention. Matt and Kyle had started a new company. A flashy tech firm with a ridiculous name, Ascendant Solutions. The post described them as visionaries, touting their past success with the company they stole from me. I felt my blood boil. But as I dug deeper, I noticed something interesting. Ascendant Solutions wasn't doing as well as they wanted people to believe. They had launched a few projects, but none had gained much traction. Their investors were growing impatient. And from what I could piece together, they'd over-leveraged themselves, taking on huge loans to fund their ambitions. It was clear they were in trouble. That's when the idea hit me. I wasn't going to sit back and watch them fail. I was going to help push them over the edge. I started by keeping tabs on their every move. I set up Google alerts for their company, scoured industry news, and even followed their employees on LinkedIn to see what they were up to. I learned that they were working on a big project, a software platform that promised to revolutionize supply chain management. It was ambitious, but also risky. The more I read about it, the more I realized they were out of their depth. Supply chain software was incredibly complex, and Matt and Kyle weren't known for their attention to detail. If they made even one mistake, it could cost them everything. So, I decided to give them a little nudge. Using my network, I started reaching out to their competitors, other companies in the supply chain space. I didn't reveal who I was or my connection to Ascendance, but I dropped enough hints to make them curious. "Hey, I hear Ascendance is working on a new platform," I'd say casually during a meeting. "You might want to keep an eye on that." It didn't take long for the competitors to step up their game. They launched marketing campaigns, slashed their prices, and rushed their own products to market. Suddenly, Ascendance wasn't just struggling to build their software, they were fighting a full-on war for relevance. But I wasn't done yet. Next, I reached out to a few of my contacts in the investment world. Over the past year, I'd built strong relationships with several venture capitalists and angel investors. I knew some of them had ties to Ascendance, so I started planting seeds of doubt. "Have you seen their burn rate?" I'd ask over drinks. "They're spending like crazy without much to show for it." I'd be careful if I were you. At first, I wasn't sure if it was working. But then, I noticed something. Ascendant's social media went quiet. Their marketing campaigns slowed down. And when I checked their website, I saw they'd started offering steep discounts on their existing products, a desperate move to generate cash flow. They were running out of money. It was almost too easy. The final blow came 6 months later. A mutual acquaintance reached out to me out of the blue. He worked for one of Ascendant's creditors and had heard through the grapevine that they were on the verge of defaulting on their loans. "They're looking for a buyer," he said. "Do you know anyone who might be interested?" I nearly laughed out loud. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I might know someone." The next day, I called up a few of my wealthiest clients and pitched them an idea. We'd buy out Ascendance for pennies on the dollar, strip it down, and rebuild it into something profitable. It would be a risky move, but if anyone knew how to turn a sinking ship around, it was me. My clients agreed, and within a week, we had a formal offer on the table. When Matt and Kyle saw me walk into their office to finalize the deal, the look on their faces was priceless. Matt and Kyle were visibly shaken when I walked into the sleek but nearly empty office of Ascendant Solutions. It was a far cry from the confident, over-the-top tech brothers they once were. Matt stood awkwardly by the window, pretending to check his phone, while Kyle sat stiffly at the head of the conference table, flipping through the contract papers with trembling hands. "Long time, no see," I said, letting my words linger in the tense air. Matt finally looked up, his face pale. You're the buyer." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Surprise." Kyle leaned forward, glaring at me like I'd just kicked his dog. "What kind of game are you playing?" "No game," I replied casually, sliding into a chair across from him. "Your company's struggling, you're out of cash, and I'm here to help. Call it poetic timing." Matt let out a nervous laugh, trying to mask his discomfort. "Come on, man. You can't seriously think this is about helping us. What do you really want?" I leaned back in my chair, letting my gaze wander around the room. The office was filled with remnants of their former arrogance, designer furniture, oversized monitors, and even a half-empty bottle of expensive whiskey on a side table. It was clear they'd burned through money without a second thought. "I want what's on the table," I said calmly. "Your company, your assets, and whatever scraps are left. That's the deal." Kyle's knuckles turned white as he gripped the papers. "This is a joke." "Oh, it's very real," I said, my tone sharpening. "You two built this company on a house of cards. Your investors have bailed, your creditors are breathing down your necks, and your competitors are eating you alive. The only reason you're not bankrupt yet is because of this deal." I paused, letting the truth sink in. "I'm your only way out." Matt's facade cracked, and he sank into a chair beside Kyle. For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Kyle looked at me, his jaw tight. "So that's it? You waltz in here, buy us out for nothing, and walk away with everything we've worked for?" I tilted my head, pretending to think. "You mean like how you waltzed into my office 3 years ago and stole my company?" "Yeah, something like that." Kyle's face flushed red, but he didn't argue. He knew there was nothing he could say. Matt finally broke the silence. "Look, we get it, okay? You're mad. You've been mad. But this is too far. We were friends once." I let out a dry laugh. "Friends? Is that what we were when you blindsided me and sold my company for millions? Or when you left me with nothing while you two rode off into the sunset?" Matt's eyes dropped to the table. "We were desperate," he muttered. "We didn't think." "You didn't think I'd survive," I interrupted coldly. "But here I am." The signing process was quick, almost anticlimactic. Kyle scribbled his name at the bottom of the contract with a scowl, while Matt hesitated, staring at the papers like they were his own death sentence. "This is business," I said, echoing the words they'd once thrown at me. Matt signed. And just like that, Ascendant Solutions was mine. But I wasn't done yet. Over the next week, I went through their books, their contracts, their entire operation with a fine-tooth comb. I wanted to see every detail of the mess they'd made. And the more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became. Matt and Kyle had burned through millions trying to look successful. They'd spent lavishly on marketing stunts, swanky offices, and useless tech they didn't need. Meanwhile, their employees were underpaid, their software was riddled with bugs, and their clients were jumping ship. This wasn't just incompetence, it was arrogance. I called a meeting with the remaining staff. Most of them were young, overworked, and clearly terrified of what the future held. They expected me to walk in, announce mass layoffs, and shut the whole thing down. But that wasn't my plan. "I know what you're all thinking," I said, standing at the front of the room. "Another CEO here to cut jobs and sell off the pieces. But that's not why I'm here." They looked at me skeptically, but I pressed on. "This company has potential," I continued. "Not because of what Matt and Kyle did, they ran this place into the ground, but because of you. You're the ones who've been holding it together, and if you're willing to stick with me, I'll make sure we turn this around." One by one, the tension in the room began to ease. People nodded hesitantly, and a few even smiled. I knew it wouldn't be easy to rebuild their trust, but I had a plan. I spent the next few months doing what Matt and Kyle had failed to do, focusing on the work. I scrapped their flashy but useless projects and poured resources into fixing the supply chain platform. I brought in a team of experts to overhaul the code, streamline the design, and deliver what the clients actually wanted. Word started to spread that Ascendant Solutions was under new management. Old clients came back. New ones signed on. Revenue started flowing again, slowly at first, then faster. It wasn't long before the company was back in the black. And that's when I made my next move. One evening, after wrapping up a meeting with a major client, I sent Matt and Kyle an invitation to dinner. I chose an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place I knew they'd find hard to resist. They showed up, looking uneasy but curious. I could tell they hadn't been doing well. Matt's suit was wrinkled, and Kyle's watch, a gaudy piece he used to brag about, was gone. We sat at a corner table, and after some awkward small talk, I got to the point. "I thought you'd like to know," I said, swirling a glass of wine, "Ascendance is profitable again. In fact, we're about to land the biggest deal in the company's history." Kyle's face darkened. "Why are you telling us this? Just to rub it in?" "Not at all," I said, leaning forward. "I wanted to thank you." They stared at me, confused. "If it weren't for what you did, I wouldn't be where I am now," I said. "You taught me a valuable lesson about trust, loyalty, and what it takes to succeed in this world." Matt shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we made mistakes. We get that. But do you really have to keep dragging this out?" "Oh, this isn't about dragging anything out," I replied, my tone icy. "It's about closure. You see, I've spent the last 3 years rebuilding everything you tried to take from me. And now that I have, I just wanted you to know, I won." Kyle clenched his jaw, but neither of them had a comeback. I signaled for the check, stood up, and looked them in the eyes one last time. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said with a smirk. "Dinner's on me." As I walked out of the restaurant, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. They were finally in my rearview mirror. And I was finally free. The months that followed my dinner with Matt and Kyle were a whirlwind of success. Ascendance Solutions had not only recovered but was thriving. The turnaround was so dramatic that industry insiders began calling it one of the greatest comebacks in the tech world. Investors clamored to throw money at us, major clients lined up to work with us, and even the media started to take notice. One day, I was sitting in my new corner office, a far cry from the dingy apartments and endless ramen noodles I'd endured in the years prior, when my assistant buzzed in. "There's a reporter here to see you," she said. I frowned. I hadn't scheduled any interviews that day. "Who is it?" "Her name's Claire Adams. She's with the Business Chronicle. She says it's about your old company." Matt and Kyle. Just the mention of them still sent a small jolt of irritation through me, though I had tried to move on. I debated turning her away, but something about the timing felt intriguing. "Send her in," I said. Claire was sharp-looking, with a no-nonsense demeanor and a reporter's trademark poker face. She sat down across from me, pulled out a recorder, and placed it on my desk. "Thanks for meeting with me," she said. "Let's get to it," I replied. "What's this about?" She smiled faintly, like she knew something I didn't. "It's about Ascendance Solutions. And Matt and Kyle." I leaned back in my chair, my interest piqued. "Go on." Claire pressed a button on the recorder. "Before we start, I should let you know, I've been digging into some of the events that led to your buyout of Ascendance. I found something I think you'll want to hear." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that right?" She hit play, and what came next sent a chill down my spine. The voice on the recording was Kyle's, unmistakable, though his usually brash tones sounded panicked. "Look, we had no choice, okay," he was saying. "If we didn't push him out, we would have been the ones going under." "Do you regret it?" a woman's voice asked. I assumed it was Claire's. Kyle hesitated. "I mean, yeah. Sometimes. But it's not like we were the only ones involved. Matt and I were following orders." "Orders?" Claire pressed. "From who?" Kyle's voice dropped, barely audible. "The investors. They wanted him gone. Said he wasn't aggressive enough, wasn't willing to play dirty. They wanted us to force him out so they could flip the company for a quick profit. We were just the middlemen." "Who specifically?" Claire asked, her tone sharp. There was a long pause. Then Kyle muttered a name I hadn't heard in years. David Greer. I froze. David Greer. He was one of the original investors in my old company. Back then, he'd been charismatic, supportive, the kind of guy who made you feel like he believed in your vision. But I'd always sensed an edge to him, a ruthless streak he tried to keep hidden behind his charming facade. Claire paused the recording, watching my reaction closely. I take it that name means something to you? I swallowed hard, trying to mask the storm of emotions churning inside me. He was one of our early backers, I said carefully. I haven't heard from him in years. Well, Claire said, leaning forward, it turns out he was more involved in what happened to you than you realized. Kyle claims Greer orchestrated the entire thing, your removal, the sale of the company, everything. Matt and Kyle were just pawns. I clenched my fists under the desk. The betrayal I'd felt from Matt and Kyle had been bad enough, but now, to learn that the man who had once promised to support me had been the puppet master pulling the strings, it was infuriating. But Claire wasn't finished. That's not all, she said, pulling out a folder and sliding it across the desk. I opened it, my eyes scanning the documents inside. They were financial records, emails, contracts, and they painted a damning picture. After selling my company, Greer had made a fortune flipping it to the corporation. But instead of walking away clean, he'd doubled down, using the proceeds to fund Ascendant Solutions. He'd been their silent partner all along, quietly profiting off Matt and Kyle's reckless spending while keeping his name out of the spotlight. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice tight. Claire smiled faintly. Because I think you deserve to know the full story. And because I need your help. That night, I couldn't sleep. The revelation about Greer kept replaying in my mind. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was bigger than Matt and Kyle. Greer had been manipulating all of us, using my company, and my life, as nothing more than a means to line his pockets. For years, I'd thought I'd won. But now I realized the real villain had been out there all along, untouchable and unbothered. That was about to change. Over the next few weeks, I worked with Claire to gather everything we needed to expose Greer. Her investigation had already uncovered enough to raise eyebrows, but with my insider knowledge and network, we dug even deeper. What we found was worse than I imagined. Greer had been running a pattern of the same scheme for years, investing in startups, forcing out their founders, and flipping them for profit while leaving the original teams in ruins. He was a vulture, preying on the dreams of entrepreneurs and discarding them when they'd served their purpose. But this time, he'd underestimated me. The exposé hit like a bomb. Claire published the article on a Monday morning, and by noon, it had gone viral. The headline read, "The Kingmaker's Lies, How David Greer Built His Fortune on Betrayal." The story was everywhere, on social media, in the news, even on TV. Greer's carefully curated image as a visionary investor was destroyed overnight. His other ventures began to crumble as clients and partners distanced themselves from the scandal. Lawsuits followed, and within weeks, his entire empire was in freefall. But I wasn't done. Using the information Claire and I had uncovered, I filed a lawsuit of my own, accusing Greer of fraud and breach of contract for his role in the theft of my company. It was a long shot, but I didn't care about the money, I cared about the message. And then, just when I thought I'd seen it all, I got an email from Matt. The subject line was simple, "We need to talk." I almost deleted it, but curiosity got the better of me. Matt's message was surprisingly candid. He admitted everything, how he and Kyle had been manipulated by Greer, how they'd been promised a cut of the profits if they played along, and how they'd spent the last few months watching everything they'd built collapse. He ended with a plea, "We were wrong, and we know it. But Greer used all of us, and he deserves everything that's coming to him. If there's any way we can make things right, let us know." I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to let him stew in the mess he'd made. But another part of me saw the opportunity. Matt and Kyle had betrayed me, yes. But now they were tools I could use to finish what I'd started. So, I replied with a single sentence. Let's meet. It turns out, revenge isn't just a dish best served cold, it's a meal you savor, course by course. And this time, I wasn't just going to take down the people who wronged me. I was going to take down the entire system that allowed it to happen. For the first time in years, I felt unstoppable.